Alright, I am back with another video, and I'm back with a video you guys probably weren't expecting. This was a build request that came up in the comments section of one of my videos, and when I saw it, I actually had to give it a try. Not only is it a build with a really interesting, unique theme to it, it's also a build that focuses on a weapon type that I've never actually made very good use of before, and that's torches, which can be surprisingly powerful. You may be thinking, hey, where's the single class party build for this week? Anyways, moving on. So, today we're building Alan Wake. Now, I myself played the original Alan Wake and Alan Wake's American Nightmare, or whatever it was called, but I have not yet played Alan Wake 2, that epic exclusivity. Well, I'm not willing to go through all that, so I've yet to play it, but I am hoping to soon. But when the build request came up to basically kind of make an Alan Wake build, a build that somehow uses light as a part of the build, it got me thinking to the days back when I played the original Alan Wake, about how the basic gameplay loop was using the different sources of light, like your own flashlight, to be able to weaken enemies before you attack them. And that got me thinking about how I could replicate that in Baldur's Gate 3. And I've got it. It's a setup that I've used before, but I've done it in a kind of different and more unique way this time that I think you guys will appreciate. So, without much further ado, let's get into the build. To start off, let's get the kind of visuals out of the way. Yes, this is a kind of modded outfit. The hair, beard, and face are all vanilla, but the outfit is modded. There is a way to use camp clothing, you know, with the vanilla items to kind of make it look okay, but this was about as close to Alan Wake as I could get with the mods I had on hand. And I ended up basing his actual head more on the live action version, which is why he's got that hairstyle, but obviously there are other options if you wanted to do something a bit closer to the first game, or Alan Wake 2's hairstyle and all that, like in the thumbnail. But you can kind of mix and mash and go for the look however you like. I don't have like the shirt and tie or anything like that. Again, this was as close as I could get, but maybe with the right mods or even just some vanilla outfits, you can get something that looks pretty nice. But that's just the visual side out of the way. Let's get into the actual build. Starting off, we are going to be a Paladin to start. I mean, I feel like with the idea of being this like person who uses light in combat, then radiant damage is definitely the way you kind of want to go about it. Now, obviously that means, yes, picking up Divine Smite, but I actually do want Paladin for something other than Divine Smite, which I'll get into later, because actually kind of using melee weapons and Divine Smite isn't the primary focus of this build. It's just something you absolutely can do, and in some interesting ways. Again, I'm going to show off some stuff that you might not know about this game in this build. So, we're kicking off things off with Paladin. This is going to give us access to every weapon and armor proficiency, which we do want. We want to be able to wear at least medium armor with this build, as well as being able to have access to any weapon we like, even though we're only using a club type weapon, the torch, at the end of the day, which most classes would give us. So actually, if you do want to start with Bard, you can do that if you don't care about the medium armor thing, because spoiler alert, we're going Bard. I mean, it's Alan Wake. Of course we're going Bard. So, you know, you can kind of do that if you want to. It's entirely up to you. But for now, I'm just going to show off the Paladin start because it technically does give us more, but you could go with the Bard start as well. Just saying. So this build is a bit of free flow. Take the level orders in whichever way you like. As for our Paladin subclass, we can go for any of them. Any of the oaths will work for us, but Oath of Devotion is the most centered around light itself. At level 1, we'd be getting Holy Rebuke, allowing us to make it so an ally has a vengeful aura that can retaliate with radiant damage to anyone who hits them with a melee attack. So, I mean, it's kind of on theme for the build. We mainly want some abilities from Oath of Devotion that we're going to be getting later. As for the race, I've gone with human. I mean, I think that's fairly obvious, no real reason to go into that too much. I also went with the noble background. I mean, Alan Wake was a pretty successful author before the actual events of the first game, so I feel like he may come from a sort of like kind of, not necessarily a noble in like the sense that he's totally really rich, although he definitely did have some money. I would say he's also like coming from a background of someone who is kind of in the arts, in that kind of position where he goes to a lot of talks and is on talk shows and all this, and kind of interacts with social elite, even if he maybe doesn't actually see himself as one. So I felt like the noble background can work. Sage could also work, or I suppose maybe even something with a bit more of the kind of social skills aspect, but I think getting history and persuasion on this build made sense. But if you found like something else works better for you, then absolutely go for it. As for our ability scores, they're going to be a little bit strange when we kind of get into the actual build, but for now we're kind of running just a standard kit. We're starting off with dexterity at 14. While we do use dexterity-based weapons in this build, we kind of have a way of getting around. We don't really use them just for the fact that they're just a weapon that we quickly use. We use them to augment certain abilities that we're going to get to use later. Again, this will all make sense. So with that, I decided to make Constitution our more primary stat, but of course you could swap Dexterity and Constitution around if you want. Constitution is just going to give us better concentration saves and more health, which is always nice. Intelligence and Wisdom are both at 10 because, again, I didn't really want either or to be one less than the other, because I feel like Alan Wake does have Charisma, Wisdom, and Intelligence, so I've left those both at 10, with Charisma being our main spellcasting stat that we're going to need, because obviously we're doing a Paladin Bard mix here. And some of you may think, why are we not going with Wizard in this build? Well, yes, Wizard does kind of make sense for Alan, obviously because there's the whole writing spells into a spellbook thing, and then using those spells to, you know, affect the world around you, because that's the whole thing of Alan Wake. He writes his book, and then what he writes in the book affects the world around him in a weird way. At least that's how I mostly remember it. It's been a few years. So I can understand the reason of wanting to go Wizard. I could even see Divination Wizard working here, maybe for a couple of levels in that, if you feel like you don't want to go so high in Bard or Paladin. Because that would allow you to scribe scrolls. You could pick up like maybe the Warped Headband of Intellect to be able to boost up that stat, maybe dump it and then put the Wisdom up, and then you'd have access to a ton of different scrolls. Totally could see that. It's just not what I'm doing with this build, and again, you'll see why when we get to it. So, skill proficiencies. Again, this is kind of a pick your favourite situation. As a human, we are going to get access to any skill proficiency that we like. We gain history and persuasion already because of our noble background, so we get to pick 3 more. I quite like grabbing intimidation. I think insight works quite well for Alan as well, and then we get to pick up another one. I quite like stealth on this build. There were some stealth sections in the original Alan Wake, and when you're fighting these nasty shadow monsters, you probably do want to make sure that you can avoid the tougher ones when you need to. Anyways, that's it for level 1. Let's keep going. Next up, at level 2, you have a choice. I'm personally going to be showing us going into Bard right away, because more of the kind of thematic stuff that I want first comes from Bard, and I do think it actually makes sense. While it would be nice to pick up some of the stuff from Bard, like Divine Smite right off the bat, as well as the dueling fighting style, I would quite like to actually get the Bard stuff first, because this is kind of how I picture this build, because obviously this is not Alan Wake as in he is directly the Alan Wake from the game has moved into this world. No. This is just a build kind of inspired by Alan Wake. So I would say that if we're going along the same path as Alan's path in the original game, we're going to be starting off as a writer. Which means as we kind of keep writing and seeing how our writing affects the world around us, we're eventually going to learn to harness the power of radiant damage that is going to come and help us beat the shadow creatures. So while I don't actually think we need to start off with the big radiant damage, we're going to get access to radiant damage from our Bard levels in quite a fun way, at least in my opinion, so I kind of want to go there first. So let's get into it. Now, obviously, you can take these levels in any order you like. If you prefer to go straight to Paladin 5 for extra attack, feel free. But I feel like narratively, the progression of doing it this way is going to feel more satisfying in the long run. So, let's start off with Bard. Bard is going to give us a bunch of things like Bardic Inspiration, but in our case, it's not about like playing an instrument and suddenly giving someone inspiration. It's about getting kind of an aha moment, and then you write something in your book, and it kind of gives a buff to an ally that way. Like, it's kind of like an inspiration for, like a creative inspiration, rather than a musical inspiration, which is still creative inspiration, but you get what I'm trying to go for. Next up, for cantrips, we are going to get access to 2, and well, as much as going for the Vicious Mockery Friends combo right off the bat, I don't really see us using Vicious Mockery a lot in this build. It's fine as an early damage ranged option, and it's funny, but honestly, there are some abilities we could get here that would be more thematic. Obviously, Dancing Light and Light is both quite obvious. I'm going to be grabbing regular light for now, and I will still be picking up friends anyway. As for our spells, obviously we have a few options here. I quite like getting access to at least Healing Word. We'll be able to get Cure Wounds from Paladin later. And as also, Long Strider is quite nice as well. I quite like Heroism on this build as well. I think it's quite nice thematically, but we can also get that from Paladin as well, so we don't need to pick that up here. Fairy Fire, on the other hand, another way to generate light, is very useful for us and the whole party, and works nicely as an early concentration spell, so we're going to pick that up here. Now finally, you could grab Speak with Animals, but we're actually going to be getting this a different different way later. So I would suggest holding off on this one for now, and maybe picking up something else like Dissonant Whispers, just as a decent psychic damage option in the early game if you need something other than Radiant, which again we'll be getting to soon. As for your starting instrument, I can't remember if Alan does actually play an instrument. I don't know why I think he used to play piano, I can't remember, so I'm not sure if any of these instruments would be completely on theme, so you can choose one if you know more than I do. And finally, we do get an extra skill proficiency here, and I don't know really what to pick here. Investigation and would probably make sense here thematically. Deception also works, it's just a nice skill to have, so I'll probably just leave it at that. But again, it's been a few years since I played the game, maybe you could get a little bit more out of this than I can as far as thematic choices for skills. Next up, at Bard level 2, we're going to get all the stuff about Bard that we love, that third short rest through Song of Rest. We get Jack of all trades, you know what that does, we add half our proficiency bonus to all ability checks we are not proficient in, making us a great party face. That's the great part about this build, is you will get to feel that kind of protagonist role that Alan Wake takes, because you do actually get to be the face of the party with this build, which is always nice to have. We also gain access to another spell at this level, and again, pick whatever you like, it really doesn't matter. Featherfall is always just a nice utility spell to have on hand anyway for traversing the map, so I'm going to go with that here. Next up, at Bard level 3, we get to pick our Bardic subclass. Now, obviously, you could go with Valor or Swords here if you really wanted to, but I think the most on-theme approach we could take here is College of Law. College of Law is literally about writing, and about how those writings affect the world around you. So I mean, look, the icon is even a quill and pen, like, come on, we have to go with College of Law here. And College of Law is going to give us access to some stuff that I really, really want for this build, so I'm going to be picking this up here. We also gain access to another spell here, and at this point we can take level 2 spells. Again, Alan Wake isn't really a spell caster, so at this point I would mainly be taking utility options here, but there's nothing to stop you from taking the more offensive stuff. Things like Hold Person, Phantasmal Force, Knock, Lesser Restoration, all of those can be quite nice. I like Enhanced Ability as well. Detect Thoughts could also be really interesting. Just to pick your favourite situation. It won't have too much overall bearing on the build, as we're going to be mainly concentrating on other stuff, so just pick anything that kind of helps you out in the moment. In fact, maybe since we're dealing with shadowy creatures, see Invisibility, basically to see those like very easily hidden enemies, could be useful, so I could see us going with that. As for our abilities, we do gain 3 more skill proficiencies and 2 expertise, which is always nice to have. I'm going to grab Sleight of Hand, Investigation, and Perception as my chosen abilities here. And then for our expertise, I obviously like having Persuasion, and maybe... what else could we grab here? I kind of like getting Stealth expertise because that just feels kind of nice. I mean, obviously, if you want to count the little dance performance that they did as promotional stuff for the game, then Performance might be a fun skill to have, but for us it is functionally useless, so I'm not picking it here. At Bard level 4, we're going to get access to our first feat. Now, obviously at this level, since we're so charisma based, I would absolutely take an ability score improvement to our charisma at this level here, but so I don't forget it later, I actually want to show you, since we're still quite early into the video, I want to show you this kind of fun thing that I think is really going to make this build work. So, we're using clubs, right? We're using torches, and because we're using clubs, we can actually use Shillelagh from Magic Initiate Druid. But I know what you're thinking. Shillelagh uses our wisdom. Why on earth would we ever want to use that here? Here's the thing. Now, yes, this is probably a bug that could potentially get fixed. Please don't actually fix it, Larry, and it's harmless. Just let us have this one. When you gain Shillelagh from Magic Initiate Druid, the Shillelagh you get from this feat will use the spellcasting modifier of your chosen class, meaning that for us, Shillelagh will use Charisma, meaning that not only do our torches become a 1d8 of damage, they use our Charisma. We basically got Pact of the Blade here for the cost of a feat rather than a 3-level dip into Warlock, which is great for us. That is something we absolutely want. See, here it says it uses your spell casting ability. Well, for us, that's not wisdom. Now, everything else here will use our wisdom because that's how this kind of feat works. So you can pick up something like Guidance here, which is always a nice cantrip to have. And then for your once per long rest level 1 spell, you can pick up Speak with Animals here. Since you only need to cast this once per long rest anyway, that restriction basically does not apply to us, meaning that we get the full use out of this feat, and also get this really interesting unique interaction that helps bump up our build's melee capability. So, there you go. Next up, we do get another cantrip here, and Dancing Lights, because again it's on theme. And then the next thing, we do get another level 2 spell, but it's entirely up to you what you want to pick. I'm personally going to be going with Enhance Ability, because that's my personal preference. Although now that I think about it, I could also see Heat Metal kind of working thematically, because I know when Alan like stuns the enemies with his flashlight, they kind of recoil a bit, so maybe Heat Metal could kind of be flavoured as that. It's entirely up to you, pick what you like. Right, at Bard level 5, we're going to get access to our improved Bardic Inspiration. Basically, making our Bardic Inspiration now work as a D8. But this isn't as important to us as it would be on something like Swords or Valor Bard, but it's still nice to have, being able to spread that inspiration around. Also now, our Bardic Inspiration recovers on a long and short rest instead of just a long rest. We also do gain access to level 3 spells at this point, and again, it's kind of up to you what you want to pick here. Anything should really work. Hypnotic Pattern would be quite nice as a control option. Speak with Dead could be useful as a lore and gameplay option, but just use the Amulet of Lost Voices. Glyph of Warding is always a fun one, and it's probably going to be my personal pick just for the fun factor, so I'm going to go with that. And finally, at Bard level 6, we get what we came here for from Lore Bard. Yes, I know we're kind of getting a main feature here at level 7 of the build overall, but I think, again, as you kind of play through this build, you'll find that the build still works quite nicely. It's just a bit of as it kind of naturally progresses. But, again, I think you'll find that the magical secrets at this level is absolutely worth it. So, let's get into the spells. First up, we get another level 3 or lower spell from our spell list here. I'm just going to go with Hypnotic Pattern. And then finally, 2 magical secrets, and you probably can already guess where I'm going with this. Guiding Bolt, a ray of radiant damage that, because we got it through Bard, will use our Charisma instead of our Wisdom. Now, this also makes it so the next attack roll we have against the target has advantage, so that means we get the full Alan Wake combo of shining a light on our enemy, and then they are recoiled, meaning that we get to take advantage on them, dealing a big chunk of radiant damage in the process. Now, if you also want a radiant damage cantrip, you could go for Sacred Flame. Personally, I would not. I would instead go for the obvious Spirit Guardians. Now you may be thinking, Hobo, again, why have you made this a bard when you're just getting cleric abilities? Why not make this a light cleric? And I totally understand where you're coming from. But again, that multi-ability score dependence is the problem. We are going to go with Paladin with this build either way. And me personally, because I wanted to go with Paladin for reasons you'll see later, it didn't make a lot of sense for me to go into Wisdom and then have to use the Glove of Dexterity, which means taking away more interesting points from the build. This roundabout way of doing it still lets us have a fun, natural progression with the build, still gets us a lot of cool abilities, gives us high charisma, allowing us to be the face of the party, which is always nice for builds like this, and then also you gain access to the only 2 spells that I really would have wanted. That being Spirit Guardians and Guiding Bolt. Don't get me wrong, Light Cleric would also be a great option. You would get things like Sacred Flame, Produce Flame, and all of that other stuff. You get Radiance of the Dawn, and Turn Undead, and all that sort of thing, which would all work really nicely for this build. But again, I just quite like being able to do this through Bard, because I feel like that's kind of closer to what Alan Wake would be, because again, Alan Wake is a Bard, so I wanted to kind of get that same flavour and theming, but through the class that I felt better represented the character, and in my case, I do think that's Bard. Does Paladin better reflect the character? Maybe not. Maybe I could see a Cleric Bard split instead if you really wanted to go down that route. However, I did want extra attack and such like that, and Paladin was the best way to do it because it's Radiant themed and obviously gets extra attack, so I felt like that was the best way to do it. If you disagree with me, feel free to build this your own way. I'm just kind of giving you the idea. This is more about the equipment anyway. The actual build itself is quite malleable. The equipment is what sells this one, so let's keep moving. Now, for the final leveling scheme for this build, I do personally go to level 7, but there's nothing here that's too important, but I did use level 7 Bard in my testing because it will push us up to level 5 spell slots, which is what I personally want, but I'm happy to dip into Paladin now and come back for that final level of Bard later at the end if we want it. So let's get into Paladin now, which means we're finally going to be getting Divine Smite and our dueling fighting style. Because we're only going to be wielding a torch in one hand for most of the time, and any ranged weapons we use will be using one-handed anyway, we're pretty much always going to get the benefit of dueling as well, which is nice. As well as being able to prepare some spells from the Paladin spell list, namely Divine Favor, giving us an extra bit of radiant damage if we want it. We can also pick up Heroism, like I said, Bless, Shield of Faith, and Cure Wounds, a nice little radiant, healing, buffing, supporting kit there. Next up at Paladin level 3, we're going to get some light-based features. We're going to get Protection from Evil and Good, which is always nice, which again, kind of feels like it makes sense for a build like this, as well as Sanctuary, which is one of the strongest spells in the game. Always happy to have that. We're also going to get Turn the Unholy, allowing us to turn nearby undead and fiends, so kind of same as taking Cleric. As well as Sacred Weapon, allowing us to turn our weapon into a sacred weapon. Has a higher chance of hitting and emits a bright light. Yes, I give our torch more light because, I don't know, when you kind of put the light effect on the torch, it kind of looks more like a flashlight for a second. It's a bit weird. You'll see what I mean. But basically now our Charisma modifier is added to the attack rolls made with this weapon. Adding that with the fact that we're already going to be using Charisma for the attack and damage rolls for this weapon thanks to Shillelagh, we're going to be hitting quite a lot, even if we don't max out our skills. We also do gain another spell here, entirely up to you what you pick. At Paladin level 4, we're going to be getting an extra Lay on Hands charge, which is always nice. We get to equip an extra spell, and we also gain another ability score improvement, and of course I'm going to bump up our Charisma because it's the only thing we need. At Paladin level 5, we are going to be getting access to our extra attack as well as level 2 spells, including Lesser Restoration and Silence, which are both great to have. We're also going to get access to another thing that I wanted to come to Paladin for. We're getting Aid, which is nice because we actually have the spell slots to make it worthwhile, but we're also going to be picking up Branding Smite. Now, why do I want Branding Smite? Well, Branding Smite allows us to mark a creature with our attack and prevent them from turning invisible, which, again, for a Radiant-themed build that is focused upon revealing enemies in the light to weaken them, that kind of made sense to me, especially considering a lot of the shadow enemies in this game have the ability to turn invisible, so I feel like it makes sense for this build. But Branding Smite has a unique feature that you might not have known about. I feel like a lot of people who have been on this channel long enough do, as this was one of my earlier, more popular builds, the Holy Arrow. Branding Smite is the only smite option that works with ranged attacks, meaning that now, when we decide to switch to our gun gameplay, because of course the whole point is that you shoot enemies in Alan Wake, after, brightening them up with your flashlight, we can now shoot radiant damage as well, keeping with the radiant theme and giving our attacks a bit more oomph. Yes, our dexterity, which we're going to be using for the attack and damage rolls on this build, is a little bit on the low side, but you will find that when you actually cast Branding Smite, which uses your Charisma, it will work out for the better anyway. So I feel like this still works fine, but again, feel free to change around the stats on this build if you so desire. You may even feel like you want to throw the gloves of dexterity on here and make this build a bit more optimized with the rest of the stat allocation overall, but that's entirely up to you. I'm just showing my personal way of doing it. And again, we don't always optimize here, we're mainly just here to have some fun. Now finally, you have a choice here. You can go to Paladin level 6, which would give you level 4 and the 5th level spell slot, so you're going to get it either way. It would also give you Aura of Protection, giving you and your allies a bonus to saving throws equal to your Charisma modifier, if you feel like you want that. It would also give you access to an extra Paladin spell to equip. The game has given us Magic Weapon, I'm not in the position to argue. Or you can go for the 7th level of Bard, picking up a level 4 or lower spell, and also getting the same amount of spell slots, and you can also replace a spell that you might not be using anymore as well. It's entirely up to you what you want to go for here. Do you care more about getting that level 4 spell or that level 6 of Paladin? I quite like being able to get the level 4 spell option, as things like Freedom of Movement, Dimension Door, Confusion, Greater Invisibility can all be really useful. I've picked up Confusion for my testing, but I never ended up using it, and I can actually see Greater Invisibility being a bit more useful overall, since we actually have like high stealth with this build. I believe we got expertise for it, as well as things like Sleight of Hand, so we can almost be like kind of a roguish character as well, so I'm quite happy to pick that up here, but again, choose whatever you like. And that is the build. Overall, what you're getting out of this is a lot of spells. You're getting a lot of options to approach battles in different ways, all of them themed around radiant damage. Radiant damage is very, very rarely resisted in this game, meaning that it is a solid damage option for pretty much every encounter. Now, again, thanks to the kind of flexibility that we get with the fact that we're using torches, allowing us to use Shillelagh to pump more points into Charisma, which again, if you decide to use maybe like something like the Birthright Hat, which I've not shown in this build, but you could absolutely use if you want, or again, if you wanted to use something like the Gloves of Dexterity to put the points into something else, or even if you wanted to go for something like Ethel's Boon to optimize this build even further, you have a ton of choices to really kick this into overdrive. I'm just kind of showing a simple, more basic level for people that maybe saw this video and went, actually, I've been interested in Baldur's Gate 3 and I like Alan Wake, so maybe I'll give this game a try if I can build him. And in which case, you can. You're welcome. God, that sounded arrogant. I'm not normally like that if you are new to the channel. Anyways. Like I said, you have a ton, and because we're a bard, you get to be the face of the party. You have a ton of skill proficiencies to get you through the game. You have a ton of utility options here to be able to get you through any encounter. You have Sanctuary and Spirit Guardians, two of the most powerful spells in the game. You have Speak with Animals for all the RP stuff. You have Guidance and Friends to basically succeed every skill check in the game. You've got a lot of options to work with here, and you have a pretty fun and unique playstyle. You get to be Charisma based, but still getting access to things like Guiding Bolt, Sacred Weapon, Branding Smite, all that sort of thing, to really make those kind of these shadowy creatures, these fiends and undead, fear your light. You become the champion of light, as it were. Now, I don't know if that's actually like a quote from like Alan Wake 2. I just know that from the Dead by Daylight perk. So again, forgive me. My lack of knowledge on the sequel is a bit telling here. Oh, I even put it in the thumbnail. That's probably not going to come back to bite me later. Yeah, please don't spoil Alan Wake 2 for me. I know this is late into the video. Please don't spoil it. Anyway, let's get into the equipment, because like I say, I mean, you guys probably all saw this coming. The whole point of Alan Wake is that he is a guy who uses light to, debilitate his enemies. So that is exactly what we're going to be doing here. I'll get into the nitty-gritty of the actual mechanics again for those who are new, but if you've seen some of my older builds, you already know where I'm going with this. But let's get into the main attraction here, which is obviously the weapon. You can start off with a basic torch. These can be picked up pretty much anywhere in the game, but deal a d4 of damage normally, but will do a little bit extra thanks to dueling, as well as they normally use your strength, but obviously we can get to that in a minute. And it also has the ability to possibly inflict burning, I believe, as well. Sometimes they do a little bit of extra fire damage. It depends. I don't know. They're listed as doing fire damage on the wiki, but I couldn't seem to get that to happen in my testing, so maybe there's something wrong there. Either way, they're not really a very good weapon. At the start, at least. At the start of the game, you're going to be focusing more on your spell casting and supporting your allies, either with healing or control spells, or just doing damage with things like Dissonant Whispers or Vicious Mockery if you decide to take it. You're going to be playing a fairly standard bard, but once you kind of get into the later portions of the game where you can start to get more useful torches, and also obviously the Shillelagh spell through Magic Initiate Druid, you will be able to kind of make this work a bit more in your favor. Again, so you're mainly going to be playing a support build kind of in the early runs of it, but then once you get started, oh boy, do you get started. So, you start off with a regular torch, but then later on in Act 2, you can upgrade to the Shadow Lantern. The Shadow Lantern has all the kind of same things going on for it. It is a versatile club that allows you to wield it with a d6 of damage as well if you're holding it in two hands, which is interesting. But also it comes with a unique ability, Conjure Shadow Lantern Wraith. I won't spoil exactly how you get this because it's pretty involved, especially for those of you who are new to the game, so you will probably have to look up how to get it. Again, I'll have wiki pages linked in the description below. However, this is quite a fun thing to have because it kind of turns the whole fighting the shadow demons thing on its head. With this lantern, you actually get to conjure one of these shadowy creatures to fight on your side instead, kind of like Alan conquering his own creation in a way. It just felt kind of thematic, but it's basically just a solid second Act 2 option. Once you get to Act 3, however, you want the Torch of Revocation. A cool like necromantic feel to it, dealing extra necrotic damage, and is also a +1 weapon in its own right. Combining this with Shillelagh, which I'll show off now. Parabellum. It now becomes a d8, and as you can see, it has a +5 to the attack and damage rolls, despite the fact that our wisdom is at 10, meaning that yes, it is using our charisma. So it is now a pretty solid weapon. Not the greatest, but combining it with something like, just say, Branding Smite, for example, turn that up to level 5, we get a pretty decent chunk of damage out of it, and there's that extra fire damage as well. See, it does exist. I need to pay more attention. Yeah. But anyways, oh, let's fix the camera here so it's back on track. Yeah, there we go. So, with that, like I say, so you're going to have a pretty solid damage output between Divine Smite, Branding Smite, all of that good stuff with this weapon. It is basically, it's actually a pretty solid endgame weapon, all things considered, with our little setup here. So I was quite happy to kind of find this little combination that actually works, and it's going to feel quite from that thematic. Yes, it's not a flashlight, but hey, it's the closest we can get, and it still feels quite unique overall. Even if you don't have Shillelagh equipped, you're not actually taking a negative to hit because of the +1, so yeah. Anyways, let's move on. Next up, let's talk about the ranged weapons. Obviously, Alan is known for using a pistol, so we have the near misser here. This is kind of also just works as an alternative damage type. It's a +1 hand crossbow that's going to deal force damage instead of regular piercing damage, and also gives you a casting of magic missile. This is just a solid overall option. But once you reach Act 3, if you feel like you want to upgrade to a slightly bigger gun, we can go for the Fabricated Arbalest. Fabricated Arbalest is pretty cool. It's a +2 hand crossbow. Not hand crossbow, a heavy crossbow. And it comes with a couple of unique abilities. Number one, it has Illuminating Shot, allowing you to deal 1d4 of piercing damage and inflict a turn of Radiating Orb. Radiating Orb is basically going to be the status condition we're inflicting to mimic the kind of the effects of light in the Alan Wake games. Radiating Orb basically makes it that the affected entity has a -1 to attack rolls for each remaining turn. It also sheds a bright light in an area surrounding it, so we're spreading light around the arena, debilitating our enemies, making it so they have a much harder time to hit us. The condition's duration is reduced by 2 each time the entity makes an attack. So it'll attack, miss, and then lose a couple of turns. Overall, it's actually a really strong status condition if you can build it up quick enough. So for example, this inflicts 1 turn of Radiating Orb, so that's a -1 to attack rolls. However, we can stack this with other things that also give us Radiating Orb to basically, in one attack, inflict a -5 or 6 penalty to attack rolls, which is insane. Even though our AC is only 18 with this build, we can use that to basically dodge everything. You'll see in the combat footage that the only time I really get hit is if the enemy lands a critical, which is insane. But that's not the only ability that this thing has. We also have Dazzling Ray. This can be used once per short rest, deals 2d10 radiant damage, and can blind enemies. Until the spell ends, you can recast the spell, casting it again, and possibly burn each time you recast it. So this is kind of like an actual flashlight now. It deals radiant damage, fires in a line, comes from a kind of not torch, something that looks a bit more modern, and can be used again and again and again. I'd say that's pretty damn good. It does use our concentration, but hey, I think it's worth it. Next up, let's get into the clothing. We have the Diadem of Arcane Synergy here. Whenever we inflict a condition, we gain Arcane Synergy for 2 rounds. Well, we're going to be inflicting Radiating Orb left, right, and center anyway, as well as if we use Spirit Guardians, that actually does inflict a condition on the enemies called Spirit Guardians when you get close enough, so we'll be able to use that, which is great. So this is going, and what Arcane Synergy is going to do for us is add our spellcasting ability modifier to the damage that we do. So we're getting that so now we're going to be able to boost up our attacks even more. Again, we basically have Pact of the Blade without Pact of the Blade, which is really cool, in my opinion, honestly. So I'm quite happy that I think this works great. But if you'd rather max out that charisma, you can swap this out for the Birthright Hat once you get into Act 3. Next up, Cloak of Protection, just here for the AC. And of course, we have our kind of kit of Radiating Orb equipment. First up, the Luminous Armour. When the wearer deals radiant damage, which we're always going to be doing, we cause a Radiant Shockwave. That Radiant Shockwave inflicts Radiating Orb in a 3-meter radius around the target. So basically, we will attack an enemy, and then all of a sudden, boom! Them and everyone around them is inflicted with Radiating Orb. We combine this with the Luminous Gloves. Whenever we deal radiant damage, we inflict 2 turns of Radiating Orb. Automatically, that's 3 turns of Radiating Orb. That is a -3 to attack rolls. But I'm not done yet. We combine this with the Boots of Stormy Clamor. Whenever the wearer inflicts a condition upon a hostile creature, they also inflict 2 turns of Reverberation. Since we can inflict multiple conditions per turn, we can also inflict Reverberation really, really easily. Reverberation makes it so the affected entity has a -1 penalty to Strength, Dex, and Constitution saving throws, and when they have 5 or more turns of Reverberation stacked up, they take an extra bit of thunder damage and fall over prone, meaning that we now have advantage to hit them and they have to spend movement to get up. This is huge. This is a classic combo. Some of my more popular builds have used it. I believe it was the Lathander Deity build that used it, as well as some other radiant damage builds that I've done in the past. It's an extremely powerful combo. We can also keep this up with our rings. We have the Coruscation Ring, which means whenever we deal spell damage while illuminated by a light source, which again we can do fairly consistently with things like Branding Smite, we also inflict Radiating Orb upon the target for 2 turns, meaning that as long as we have a source of light, which can just be our torch as well, we can inflict a lot of Radiating Orb. Enemies will never be able to hit us. If I'm being honest, this is overkill. I don't actually think you need to stack up this much Radiating Orb, but it is incredibly fun. Now, Radiating Orb can only go up to a maximum of 10 stacks, meaning a -10 to attack rolls, which is still huge. Basically, again, the only time you're ever going to get hit is if your enemy rolls a critical hit, which is why Lore Bard is also really good, because cutting words forces them to re-roll. Again, you're pretty much never going to get hit with this build. We also have the little benefit of grabbing the Callous Glow Ring. The wearer deals an additional 2 points of damage against creatures that are illuminated. More damage is more damage. That's what we like to see. I've also thrown on the Amulet of the Devout Necklace, meaning that we gain a +2 bonus to spell save DC. It just means that our spells that require saving throws, which is all of them, have a higher chance to succeed, which is always nice. Now again, with Radiating Orb being a little bit overkill, feel free to swap out some armor pieces here. You may prefer to go for something like the Gloves of Belligerent Skies over the Luminous Gloves, or maybe a piece of heavy armor as opposed to the Luminous armor. It's entirely up to you. Pick and choose your favorites here. You might even prefer something like the Potent Robe, maybe with something like, maybe if you could pick up Mage Armor somehow, like that could work, so that would give your cantrips an even bigger buff. Stuff like that. Feel free to kind of mess around with the equipment on this build and kind of tailor it to your liking. This is just the way to kind of get the most out of the theme that we're going for. And in my opinion, personally, it makes a pretty spectacular build overall. Now, let's get into some of the just extra kind of visual stuff here very quickly. I am using mods for the visuals here, but like I said, the actual facial structure of this character can be recreated completely in vanilla. So, we have the Learned Suit camp clothing variant, as well as the Dapper Shoes camp clothing variant. This is from the SR's Legacies Suit mod. These are basically like some kind of what-if clothing options for some of the Origin characters. Specifically, this is for Gale, and I was able to color them using the dye Sorcerer Blue Silver dye from the Basket Full of Equipment mod. Combining these two together was kind of the closest I could get to Alan Wake's video game outfit. I kind of went for the live action head and then the video game outfit color scheme, because in the live action it's a bit more green, whereas in the game it's slightly more bluish and grey. So that's kind of what I went for here, and I feel like it works quite nicely, but again, you can recreate a pretty good looking character in vanilla just fine. But yeah, that is the build. Overall, I am extremely happy with how this turned out. Yes, it's kind of treading similar ground as for the whole Radiating Orb shtick, but I do feel like in this build, it was too thematic and too powerful to ignore. You get all of the fun stuff that comes with that sort of playstyle, as well as much more flexibility in how you go about it. And I think the leveling scheme is also really fun, taking those levels of Lore Bard for cutting words, as well as being able to pick up Guiding Bolts and Spirit Guardians is just so fun. Being able to inflict our ranged damage attacks with Branding Smite as well, giving us like the freaking gun of light, and even getting a flashlight in a weird way thanks to the fabricated arbalest. We just have so many different ways of inflicting radiant damage, which again, not commonly resisted, so we can really go to town with this build, and it all feels on theme. And just the idea of actually using torches as a main weapon feels so fun. With this unique little Shillelagh combo, it actually feels really interesting to play like this, and as you can see from the combat footage, it just does a lot of damage. And again, the support options that we do have to support our teammates are great. Now, obviously, I tested this build in Act 2. Well, I didn't test it in Act 2, I tested it in Act 3, but for the combat footage that you're seeing here, I decided to do it in Act 2 because that felt more on theme for this specific build. I just wanted to change things up for a bit, but I did test this in my usual Act 3 encounters, you know, the ones you usually see with the Steel Watchers on the channel. And of course, this build did absolutely fine. It is a powerful Paladin build at the end of the day, with the ability to use Radiating Orb to make it so we pretty much never get hit, as well as being able to dish out massive damage with Spirit Guardians and Divine Smite and all that good stuff. I never struggled in any of my testing. It was able to dish out massive damage and take on any encounter that I threw at it. Basically, the combat footage here was just to be on theme and have a bit of fun with it, because who doesn't like to have a bit of fun with it? The Alan Wake devs certainly do. And you know what? I respect that. Anyways, I really hope you guys all enjoyed this build. If you're here from outside of my channel because you saw Alan Wake and were kind of like interested in how this was done, I appreciate you watching all the way to the end if you actually did do so. Also, speaking of watching all the way to the end, holy crap did that last build do well. The Bloody Storm, that Dark Urge build, is by far my most popular video in a very long time. Even now, the numbers are absolutely skyrocketing. I'm so glad you guys enjoyed that one. I thought the thumbnail was... You know, that's one of my favorite parts about the whole video, actually, was the thumbnail. I was quite proud of that one. Even if it did have low-tier god vibes. For those if you get that reference, I'll be very impressed. But yeah, there's not much else to say here, so other than thank you all for watching. I really enjoyed coming up with this build. Thank you to the person who requested this. Unfortunately, I could not find the original comment for some reason. So hopefully, whoever you are, you will be willing to comment on this video so I can pin it and say, well, there you go, job done and dusted, wipe my hands of it. Because again, I really enjoyed coming up with this build. Approaching characters like this is really fun. And if you guys want me to do more popular characters, I can. It's just sometimes they're a bit tricky to make, but I think ones that come with unique and interesting challenges like this one, I like to tackle, because it let me come at the kind of game from a new perspective and think, hey, what if I use this weapon type that I never normally use? And then I found out about Shillelagh, and, you know, it just went on from there. Because originally this was going to be a, like, Cleric Druid build, again, going light Cleric, and then getting, you know, Druid for the Shillelagh. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, by the way. But then I saw in the tooltip on the wiki that was like, actually, Shillelagh, if you take it with defeat, it uses whatever your spellcasting modifier is. I'm like, no shot, let's try that. And it worked. So I'm really happy with how this came out. Hopefully you guys will enjoy it if you try it. I know the leveling can be a bit awkward. Maybe just start off a Paladin and go to Bard next if you would prefer. But I really like getting that Guiding Bolt and Spirit Guardians as early as possible. I mean, again, you saw in the combat footage, this build is just really fun to play. So, again, I'm going to stop rambling now as the combat footage is probably just about to finish because it wasn't as long this time. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.